You are listening to the free version of the Patreon Party People podcast, which means you're actually hearing last month's podcast. To hear this month's podcast, simply donate $1 or more at patreon.com/blazehedgehog. Not only do Patreon donors get a customized RSS feed to subscribe to this podcast through their favorite listening device, they also get lots of bonus extras like music archives, long-lost secret videos, and downloadable games. Just visit patreon.com/blazehedgehog. And for those of you who don't want to do rolling monthly donations, there are even links to make one-time donations via Ko-fi and paypal.me. To learn about this or anything else I just mentioned, just visit patreon.com/blazehedgehog. One last time, that's patreon.com/blazehedgehog. Hello and welcome to the Patreon Party People podcast for Sunday, December 9th, 2018. I am, of course, your host, Ryan Bloom, and as you may notice, we're doing this podcast a little bit earlier than usual. I'm fighting to get back on schedule. It's not entirely working out, but we are over a week earlier than last month's podcast, so at least that's something. But, yeah, hi guys, how you doing? I'm doing okay. It's been snowing on and off for the last week, which is pretty cool. When I originally wrote my notes here, it had been snowing for like 3 days straight, which was pretty cool. As a Colorado boy, one of the things I really worried about coming out here to Nevada, obviously it's a desert out here. I mean, you think down there in Vegas, it's a desert down there. Nevada obviously is taller vertically than it is horizontally, if that makes geological sense or whatever, but where I live in Carson City is still technically considered part of the desert. We don't really have much in the way of greenery out here. It is mostly just sagebrush and pine trees, but you think, desert, there's not going to be a lot of snow, but also, when I was like 7 years old, we visited my grandma out here in Carson City, and there was snow then. It's just last year, when we got here, it didn't snow until like February. So there was this worry that, maybe things have changed, and maybe there wasn't going to be any snow for us out here. But thankfully that isn't true. There has been a comfortable, holiday-appropriate amount of snow that's really, finally putting me into kind of a holiday mood for a change. Halloween was kind of, rough. Felt like Halloween lasted all of, a week and a half, and then all of a sudden it didn't feel like Halloween anymore. But it is definitely feeling a little bit more like Christmas out here, and hopefully you all out there had, a nice Thanksgiving and whatever else. Mine was alright. I tend to have multiple Thanksgivings because of family events and things like that. We had Thanksgiving up at my, are they considered my in-laws because my brother married, or what? I don't know. But we had dinner up at my brother's wife's parents' house. And that was good. And then we had our own Thanksgiving, and then we kind of had, what did we eat? Because we also went to my aunt's. And I don't remember what food we had there, because it was my uncle's birthday, and that wasn't really a Thanksgiving thing. What did we eat there? Gosh, I don't even remember. That was 2 weeks ago at this point, almost. But, I've kind of just been chilling here, enjoying the holiday, as it were. Enjoying it as much as I can. I said, wrestling with burnout. Gonna take a whole long holiday to rest, recuperate, recharge, get my head back into the game, so to speak. So, I've been just maxing and relaxing, some would say. Not shooting any b-ball outside of the school, though, That's not really my gig. But, Sonic Hacking Contest came and went about a week and a half ago. That was a little bit of work I did this month. Contrary to, all my fears over Sage, because, if any of you out there forgot, I know that it's only 3 podcasts ago, maybe 2, but it also has been like 3 or 4 months. So, Sage, the Sonic Amateur Games Expo, I did that for TSSE News, and that was kind of a nightmare for me because I had to review like 85 games in a week, which shook out to like 12, 13, maybe even 14 games a day. And, that's partially why I'm so burnt out, is because, I was juggling 2 video reviews and then that in the middle of it all. And there was this big sort of worry that the Sonic hacking contest would be, another nightmare. And thankfully it wasn't. There were probably around 45 to 50 games showing at the Sonic hacking contest. And technically I only really had to write about 36 of those, we'll say 50 games. The way the Sonic hacking contest works is that it's kind of divided up into judged entries, which are up for awards, and then there's also like an expo element, sort of like the Sonic Amateur Games Expo. And this year it's our first year covering it for TSSE News. I was told I only had to worry about the judged entries. So, of those 50 games, it shook out to about 36. Which was very relaxed for me. I kind of got back to my old Sage schedule of about 7 games a day. And, there were some days where I was cranking out 2 articles a day because, with babysitting and everything else, I just wouldn't have time to write an article for that day. So I'd have to, the next day, pick it up and do 2 articles in a day. And, that was divorced from the schedule of having to write that much every day for 7 or 8 days straight. Having to do 2 articles in one day, once or maybe twice was pretty relaxed. I wish Sage was like that this year because, that's something I can do. That's not really a problem to write about, 37 games. And it didn't even take me a week. It took me like 4 days. It took me like 4 or 5 days. So, it was all pretty regular and, I handled it by myself and everything was cool. So, beyond that, the other little piece of work I've done this month, my cousin runs sort of like a dressmaking sort of deal. I hesitate to call it a store, even though I guess it's technically kind of a store. It is handmade, like, dresses for little girls. And apparently she does very well for herself in that field, I guess you'd call it. So one of the things that she wanted me to do for her, I don't know how many of you out there have ever like done this before or seen this before. Sometimes you'd go to like a supermarket or whatever, and they'd have like a coloring book page for little kids to color in. And, at the end of the month or at the end of the week or whatever, they'd pick someone, the best coloring book person, kid, whatever, whoever did the best job at coloring the page. They'd pick someone and they'd get like a gift card or something. So she commissioned me to make one of those about her dress that she was selling. Because there was like a whole craft fair recently that she was a part of, selling dresses there and whatever else. So, she's running this contest through her Facebook page where, kids can color this image I made of this little girl decorating her Christmas tree with her cat. And then they can mail it to my cousin, and then they'll get like a free dress or whatever. I'm not 100% up on exactly what the prize is, but I just know that there is a prize, and it's my artwork that's on there. That was fun to do. I kind of tackled it sort of like a game design sort of challenge, if you were, thinking about, well, simple shapes, how should the image be composed, what kind of things would kids like to color, clarity, things like that, real sort of like mechanical details that I probably didn't need to think about that hard. But, it's not me if I don't overthink everything like that. Fine details like that matter, right? So it was a fun thing to do, and, I'll probably end up doing more for her in the future, I'd assume, if it's a successful operation, as it were, if she ends up getting like lots of entries and has lots of sales because of my artwork and things like that. So, that was the other thing I did this month. And beyond that, it's just been kind of kicking back, relaxing, watching YouTube. Every now and then I think, yeah, I'll do some work on something. I'll work on that Hidden Palace level that I started almost a year ago at this point and still haven't finished. Um, I was thinking about, well, this was back in October when I was thinking, maybe I'd have time for something else. I was thinking about going back to the Game Jam version of Overbite and cleaning it up a little bit. Not anything like major, like not new levels or anything like that. There's something about it that bugs me, and it's the way it handles its gamepad support. Its controller buttons stuff. It doesn't always read the controller properly and show you the correct button prompts, and it could all stand to be unified a little bit more so that it actually like worked properly and wasn't buggy and weird. So that was something I thought about going back to and just cleaning up that one little tiny element to make it more unified and, like I said, work properly instead of being super buggy and weird. There was also, I think I posted them on my blog at some point. I started doing sprites for like a last-minute shopping remake at some point. I think it was last year. Just like, I wasn't really planning on doing a game at that time. It was just sort of like this fun little art challenge to sprite out the character I ended up calling Solid Snack, even though, at this point I think that's a little bit too dumb of a pun for me. But I ended up doing like a four-directional walk cycle for him, in the top-down video game style. And there was a brief moment where I thought, I could maybe do like a quick last-minute shopping mini game. Because that very original last-minute shopping game that I did, I think most of it came together in like a week. So, it was mainly just kind of like an artificial intelligence test. So, if I was going to remake it, maybe it would only take me like a couple weeks to, get something together. But then you think about stuff like that, and it's like, yeah, it only took me a week by the standards I made games in like 2005, right? And in 2018, my standards are very different. So it probably wouldn't take me a week. It probably wouldn't take me 2 weeks, It would probably be, a month of work just for a little mini game. And at that point, maybe I shouldn't even bother. Maybe I should, if I'm going to work on a game, maybe I should focus on Overbite. The Steam version that I promised at this point, over 2 years ago. So, it's all a big mess. As usual. That's kind of the story of my life. If you've been following this podcast for long enough, I tend to be kind of scattershot because, I probably have attention deficit disorder. That's always been one of those questions I've had in the back of my head. They tried to diagnose me as attention deficit disorder back in school, and my mom, she was always like, oh no, he doesn't have attention deficit disorder. And, as I've grown up, I would say more and more symptoms have come to light about my problems being able to focus on one thing at a time. So, that's going to continue. I suppose without much to talk about regarding things I've been doing this month, we'll just jump right into the gaming news, because I do want to kind of make this a regular segment of me talking about things that I think are relevant this month, as long as there's like something relevant to talk about, which is to say, I don't necessarily know that this is going to be a recurring segment all the time, but it will be when I have something to say. And top of the list here, the PlayStation Classic has turned out to be even worse than most people suspected. There are a wide variety of like emulation issues. Most people were complaining about just the list of games that were included with it because there are some real suspicious characters in there that don't probably deserve to be sold on something like the PlayStation Classic. And as it turns out, even if you wanted to play the good games on this thing, you probably don't want to. Digital Foundry, a service of, I guess, Eurogamer, I think it is, they do like all these really in-depth, in-detail hardware breakdowns and software breakdowns, frame rate analysis, output resolution, all this really like nitty-gritty technological stuff. And they put the PlayStation Classic through the ringer and it came out the other end, looking like a piece of garbage. There's games that have like really bad sound problems. There's games that have like slowdown issues that didn't originally have slowdown issues. Nearly half the games on the collection are the European versions that run like 20% slower than the North American versions. And that's because of like the British PAL TV standard and all this other crazy nonsense. So, go to YouTube and punch in Digital Foundry PlayStation Classic and you can find their video. It's very enlightening if you were like still on the fence about whether or not you wanted to buy a PlayStation Classic. Because like I said, even if you wanted to play something like Ridge Racer 4 or Final Fantasy 7 or, I don't know, Siphon Filter, Tekken 3, that's not the best way you can play those games. So definitely give that video a look, reconsider your purchase, and just wow. And like, obviously, there's even more beyond that. I don't really have like a source for this. This is just something you hear, like, friends talking with friends, like, oh, did you hear about this or that? I've apparently heard that the PlayStation Classic also has like up to 8 gigabytes of unused storage. So like you think about hearing something like that, and it sounds like a lot more games might have been expected to be included that ended up being cut or whatever else. But, having that much unused storage on the device also undoubtedly, like, drives up the price. So, that's kind of weird, but obviously when it comes to people homebrew modding this device to, I don't know, replace the emulator software or whatever else, having that much extra space will definitely be useful. That's up to, like, another 16 to 20 games on top of what we already have. So, that's good, question mark? I'm not entirely sure. And on the subject of there maybe have been like a much larger list of games that could have been included on the PlayStation Classic, as part of people like tearing this device down and, trying to modify it and see what it can do, apparently a list of up to 37 games has been recovered from inside the PlayStation Classic, and they're all of games that we didn't end up getting. Now, there's no way to really like know whether or not this list of games inside the PlayStation Classic was like actually cut from the device, like if it was actually pitched to have all 37 of these games, or whether or not, they were just games to test the emulator or whatever. But there's some pretty good games on this list that really deserved to be part of the PlayStation Classic. The list, if you just want to know what the list is, it was Chocobo Racing, Colin McRae Rally, Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2, Toy Story 2, Driver, Guys, Fighting Force, Gran Turismo, Grand Theft Auto 2, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Deception 2, Klonoa, Kula World, I have no idea what that game is, Soul Reaver, Medal of Honor, Medieval, Mega Man Legends, Mr. Driller G, Paka Paka Passion, also no idea what that game is, Parappa the Rapper, Parasite Eve, Raystorm, oh, I just lost my place, Raystorm, Ridge Racer, the original Ridge Racer, Silent Hill, Spec Ops, Stealth Patrol, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Street Fighter EX, Suikoden? Yes, that's how you say that. Tomb Raider, Tomb Raider 2, Tomba, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, Vagrant Story, Wild Arms 2, and Xevious 3DG+. Obviously, in a lot of ways, that is a much better list of games than we ended up getting. It sucks that there's no, like, Metal Gear or Final Fantasy VII or Tekken 3, but we also ditched stinkers like Battle Arena Toshinden and, that awful Rainbow Six first-person shooter from Ubisoft. But the thing is, like, even if this list of 36 games or whatever for the PlayStation Classic is so much better, obviously there are a lot of problems with the games that are in the list. There's like licensing issues that would have gotten in the way. Like in the case of Colin McRae's Rally, like Colin McRae is dead. I'm pretty sure his estate doesn't really like his name being used anymore. So, his game's out. Gran Turismo is full of like real world cars. There's like, Mitsubishi and Toyota and Ford and everything in there. That would be expensive to license. Medal of Honor is probably full of real world licensed guns, which is, that actually costs money. If you ever wondered why, like, the old GoldenEye games don't use real world gun names, or like there was a version of Counter-Strike that had like fake names for all their guns. Like it wasn't called a Desert Eagle, it was called like a Nighthawk or whatever. That's because you actually have to pay money to use the name Desert Eagle. So, Medal of Honor is probably full of real World War II guns, real World War II tanks and things like that would cost money, which is, very expensive. And then obviously there's something like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which is full of celebrity likenesses, the skaters. It's full of celebrity, well, not celebrity, but like skateboard brands, like real world brand names for skateboards. And of course, it is just packed wall to wall with licensed music. I feel like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is probably the very first like major usage of licensed music in a video game, outside of like, I don't know, like Rock and Roll Racing maybe. So that would be like a super expensive game to put on the PlayStation Classic. And then you get to like games like Soul Reaver. That game has like a really crazy like legal history because Silicon Knights made the original Legacy of Kain game, that top-down sort of like Zelda game where you're Kain running around in like forests and stuff. And then apparently, like again, Digital Foundry has a whole video tracking the history of Soul Reaver. And so Silicon Knights made the original Legacy of Kain game. Soul Reaver is a sequel to Legacy of Kain, but it's like Soul Reaver wasn't made by Silicon Knights. It was made by I think it was IDOS. I don't remember the exact developer. I think it was Crystal Dynamics, actually, developed that Soul Reaver game. And, Silicon Knights wanted their money, and Crystal Dynamics and IDOS wasn't going to give it up. So, there was like a whole like lawsuit around Soul Reaver, who owns what, who gets royalties. So, that's a legal headache that they'd have to untangle. Street Fighter EX, that's another legal headache. It wasn't developed by Capcom. It was developed by a company called Arika, who ended up putting like a bunch of original non-Street Fighter characters into the game. So, if you're going to bring back Street Fighter EX like that, you'd have to get approval from both Capcom and Arika, which is, probably beyond the scope of a project like this. And then, again, Harry Potter is a mess. Sorcerer's Stone was developed by Electronic Arts back when they had the license. Who owns the license now? WB Games. So you'd have to get approval from both Electronic Arts and WB to bring that game out to something like the PlayStation Classic. And, in particular with that game, both Electronic Arts and WB Games are pretty far up on the list of developers that probably wouldn't budge to the other. They're kind of rivals. So that game is out. And then there's something like Parappa the Rapper, which is basically impossible to emulate properly. I actually have like a whole script about how, like, what a tragedy it is that there's no way to accurately play Parappa the Rapper anymore without like digging up an original PlayStation 1 or like a PlayStation 2 and just playing the original disc. You can't emulate that game. The PSP version sucks. The PlayStation 4 version is just a port of the PSP game, so that sucks too. So, that's not going to appear on the PlayStation Classic if they can't get the game working properly. And then, that also kind of applies to Ehrgeiz, which is... Did I skip Ehrgeiz? I feel like I skipped... No, I didn't. Again, Ehrgeiz is another difficult to emulate game. It's not quite as hard as Parappa the Rapper. Like, if you have a PlayStation emulator, you can play Ehrgeiz if you wanted to play that weird, 360-degree free range of movement fighting game from Square Enix. But the problem with that is that Urguys uses like special rendering modes and things like that. So it has like fairly high system requirements, higher than most PlayStation 1 games that you want to try and emulate. I know that on my crummy laptop that I was stuck on for, 9 months or whatever, I could emulate PlayStation 1 games on that just fine, except for Urguys. That trying to emulate that game like gave me like really awful frame rate problems and like sound crackling and things like that. It runs fine now on my desktop, which is much more powerful than that laptop, but there were problems trying to run it on that laptop. So there would probably be problems trying to run it on the PlayStation Classic. And then, you think about games like Silent Hill, or like there are like 6 Square Enix games on here, because you have to remember Square Enix owns IDOS now. So Tomb Raider, Soul Reaver, whatever else, those are now Square Enix games on top of Chocobo Racing and Vagrant Story and Urguys. And on the final PlayStation Classic, there's only Final Fantasy VII. And there are, like, increasing evidence has been surfacing. Wow, that was a sentence. Increasing evidence has been surfacing that Square Enix is not a very easy developer to work with. Sakurai has, like, sort of, like, not necessarily called them out by name, but he has mentioned that some developers are hard to work with, and it was heavily implied that he was talking about Square Enix, and including Cloud in the Super Smash Bros. Games. So, it's very likely that someone at Sony said, hey, here's all these Squaresoft games we want to include on the PlayStation Classic, and Square Enix said, nope. You don't get Tomb Raider, you don't get Vagrant Story, you don't get Chocobo Racing, you don't get Soul Reaver. Get out of my face. And all they really could swing for was Final Fantasy VII. And the same could probably be said for Konami, Get out of my face, you don't deserve Silent Hill, you don't deserve... what was the other Konami game that was on here? It was Silent Hill and something else. Suikoden. Well, definitely they're not giving them Suikoden. That's kind of a dead franchise at that point. So, it's all this, like, weird legal nonsense. At the same time, though, that's still no excuse for Sony, I'd say. I don't think we can really say, legal troubles really strangled the PlayStation Classic. I do think that in certain cases, like with... Vagrant Story and whatever else, Sony could have thrown their muscle around a little bit and said, hey, give us Vagrant Story now. And Square Enix would have had to, like, bend to their will or whatever, and they didn't. So, it's just, this whole thing is just, it feels like an endless nightmare. Like, the PlayStation Classic has been such a mess, and it's only getting messier. And, like, on top of this, something else that was discovered about the PlayStation Classic is people are, like, poking and prodding at things inside in the system. So it's been known for a while that, like, the PlayStation Classic runs an open source emulator called PCSX Rearmed. And that's, like, that's not necessarily what I would say is, like, the best PlayStation 1 emulator out there right now. I prefer Beetle PlayStation, which is a Mednafen sort of core in RetroArch, and I probably just said a lot of words that sounded like complete nonsense to a lot of people, but it is a PlayStation emulator inside of this front end called RetroArch, or I guess some people say RetroArch. That is currently my PlayStation emulator of choice. But a lot of people swear by this PSSX rearmed emulator, and that's what's inside the PlayStation Classic. As it turns out, the controller ports for the PlayStation Classic are just USB ports. You can plug the PlayStation controllers into your computer, and they don't work yet, but you'll probably be able to use those PlayStation controllers at some point in the future on your PC. And obviously, once they hack the PlayStation Classic, you'll probably be able to plug in whatever USB controller into that thing that you want. But in the meantime, people have discovered that if you plug a USB keyboard into the PlayStation Classic and hit the ESC key, the escape key, it just brings up the emulator settings menu. It just, like the PSSX menu, it just brings it up. And from there, you can actually tweak the emulator settings to like kind of fix some of the problems in the PlayStation Classic. Like you can force to turn the PAL mode off so that it speeds up the emulation in some of the games. You can remap your controls. You can do all the stuff that is not normally supported by the PlayStation Classic just by plugging in a USB keyboard and hitting the escape key. It is very ridiculous. It's one of those things where it's just, again, this whole thing sounds like a nightmare, and it also sounds like it's maybe held together by like chewing gum and duct tape. I imagine that, you know, in a week or two, we'll get a news story announced, PlayStation Classic hacked wide open. You can just plug in a USB storage device and load games off a thumb drive and, you know, whatever else. It's going to be weird. But yeah, just, you know, PlayStation Classic is a mess. I hope none of you out there have already bought one. And if you did, I hope that you're like, you're satisfied with your purchase, because I certainly wouldn't be. But again, you know, I didn't buy one. In other news, the Game Awards were the other night, and well, you know, technically I don't really have a lot to say about the Game Awards, but apparently I do. They were fine, honestly. You know, there were some cringeworthy moments in there, but I think there are always going to be cringeworthy moments in something like the Game Awards. You think about like E3 or something, and you know, at every press conference, at everything, there's usually at least one moment in there where it's like, ugh, you shouldn't have said that, you know? So for there to be like a couple cringeworthy moments in the Game Awards, like Ninja presenting an award with Pepe from, you know, the Muppets or whatever, that was pretty cringy. I think something like that is just always going to happen. I mean, you know, you're getting gamers up there on the stage who are pretty nerdy, and people who make games who are pretty nerdy. There's always going to be a faux pas. So, you know, that's just how it's gonna be. But beyond like the few cringeworthy moments, you know, I think I generally enjoyed the Game Awards. As far as like it's just like, it's supposed to be the gaming's Oscars, right? It's supposed to be this big, fancy, flashy, sparkly spectacle. And as that, it works, I guess. My main issue is that the categories were kind of crappy. All throughout the show, like one point they kept harping on over and over and over and over again was about how 2018 has been one of the best years for games in a long time. And like, I didn't really get that sense very much. It really felt like the same 6 or 7 games kept coming up for almost every single category. You know, there was God of War, Red Dead Redemption 2, Celeste, Spider-Man, Fortnite, Detroit, and like, I don't know, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I guess. And out of those like 6 or 7 games or whatever, it really felt like God of War and especially Red Dead cleaned up almost every single category there was. You know, obviously, you know, there were outliers, like, you know, Celeste took Best Music, I think, took Best Indie Game. But it didn't feel like there was a whole lot of diversity with what was chosen. Like, you know, where was a game like The Iconoclasts? Where was a game like Subnautica? And then you have like the Trending Gamer of the Year award they had last year. Now it's been replaced with Best Content Creator, which is like an equally worthless category to have. Especially because all the nominees were just like Fortnite streamers. It wasn't really anyone that was creating content. It was all just people who streamed Fortnite. And obviously, out of the people who stream Fortnite, Ninja is going to win the award. And surprise and shock, Ninja won the award. That category actually needs to like nominate people who matter, you know, like nominate people from AGDQ or whatever. Nominate people who advance the field of streaming forward, or, you know, advance video forward or something. Not just people who have like really high popularity and really good numbers, you know? That, I don't think giving those people an award is serving anyone. Another good example of someone to nominate would be like, I don't know, Spooky, who covers Evo. I'm sure there's like a whole list of people besides Fortnite streamers who actually make a difference that need to be nominated and need to be like actually given an award. But you know, besides that, it was fine. It wasn't the worst thing. I mean, it's better than the Spike TV Game Awards. It's a lot less boring than the DICE or GDC Awards. But, you know, there's just room for improvement. For the final story in this gaming news segment, Sonic Unleashed was added to the Xbox One backwards compatibility, which was, like, to be honest, like one of the last games I was really, like, holding out for. It's really solidified that I should probably pick up an Xbox One at some point, you know? Obviously, I'd really like to replace my Xbox 360 because, you know, I have so many games on that thing, but having an Xbox One would work really well too, you know, and at that point, like, I'd have to worry a lot less about if my Xbox 360 broke, you know? And, like, you think about, like, Xbox One exclusives, a lot of those are on the PC now, you know, Forza Horizon 4, Sunset Overdrive, Gears of War 4, I guess. But also, like, with regards to that, you know, Forza Horizon 4 runs fine on my system, but at the same time, it would be nice if I could just have a game console where I could put the disc in and go. You know, that's kind of the primary bonus of a game console at this point, is that you don't really have to worry about configuration settings or anything like that. It just works. So it would be nice, I think, to have one of those. But, you know, obviously not all my Xbox 360 games work on the Xbox One. But we're kind of getting off topic here. The story is Sonic Unleashed is now backwards compatible, which means that if you have your Xbox 360 disc for Sonic Unleashed, you can put it into an Xbox One and it'll play the game. Usually what this means is that you'll get like enhanced frame rates or enhanced resolutions. And there was like some debate on whether or not Sonic Unleashed on the Xbox One was actually enhanced or not. And after talking it over with a bunch of people, excuse me, and doing like a lot of independent research of my own, it seems like if you're playing it on a standard Xbox One, like, you know, the original release, or an Xbox One S, there's not really much improvement over the original Xbox 360 version. But if you own an Xbox One X, the, you know, more expensive high-end version of the Xbox One, then yeah, there is like appreciable frame rate improvements. It'll never go over 30 frames per second. It's always going to be capped at 30. But areas like the Empire City Hub, a few other places have been actually smoothed out considerably. Their frame rate problems are now mitigated. I don't know if they've been completely removed entirely, but they have been mitigated, and that's at least something. Maybe I'll like cooperate with someone else and put together a proper video in the future. I'm not like 100% sure on that, but you know, we'll find out in the future, I guess, which is, you know, probably speak for don't count on it. I probably shouldn't like stamp on things like that and like, you know, say, oh, I'm not going to do it or whatever, but you know, I'm trying to relax over here. So the idea of doing a little bit more work when I'm supposed to be, you know, recharging myself and being on a holiday probably isn't the best idea. But yeah, Sonic Unleashed on the Xbox One, finally. That is almost every Sonic game for the Xbox 360 now backwards compatible. That's pretty cool. I should get an Xbox One, or maybe just try and find a new Xbox 360. Like, that's the other problem, not to go back to this topic again, but finding a new Xbox 360 is a challenge, let's say. And with something like an Xbox 360, with like the track record of hardware failures those things have had, I'm not necessarily sure that I want to like track down a used 360 because, who knows how long that thing has left to live. Maybe the hard drive will die on me. Maybe the disk drive is already a mess. My disk drive on my 360 barely works. So, I'd like to get a new Xbox 360, but I could also just get an Xbox One because, at this point, out of the, 100, 200 games that I own on the Xbox 360, around half of them are supported by backwards compatibility, and most of it is the stuff that I'd want to play, like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Generations, Sonic the Fighters, Daytona USA, the Gears of War trilogy, Banjo-Kazooie, both original and extra crispy edition. By that I mean nuts and bolts, by the way. Just lots of good stuff. I own a copy of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 that I've never played, and I could put that into an Xbox One and play it. I could also put it into my Xbox 360 and play it, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, that's something, regardless, I don't have the money for any of this anyway, so, just something, a fun thing to think about. But that is the end of the gaming news segment, as it were. We're going to take a quick break, and then I guess when we come back, I'll talk about whatever classifies as Game of the Year for me, whatever that means. So, stay tuned, I guess. And we're back. As always with Game of the Year stuff, I don't play a lot of like new releases throughout the year or anything. Usually the only new releases I play are part of like reviews that I write or videos that I produce for TSSZnews.com. So, obviously the only new release I played this year was Sonic Mania Plus. Everything else has kind of been older retro games or whatever else fit into that criteria. So, as usual, as I always do over the years, we'll just recap kind of everything I've played this year. Not quite everything, because that would make for, an hours and hours and hours long podcast, but we'll hit like a highlight reel of things that I think was notable that I played throughout the year, and I'll talk about my feelings, maybe like reiterate some things that I've already said or whatever else, and we'll just see how that shakes out. Maybe it'll be boring, but you're listening to this podcast, so, you're probably used to that by now. And also, this list might not be, like, entirely 100% accurate. How I track this stuff is that I go through my Backloggery account, located at backloggery.com. And usually, I only update that thing, like, 3 or 4 times a year, so there are probably like 2017 games I'm about to talk about here at the start that I did not actually touch in 2018. So apologies if that's the case, but that's just the way this works out, because I didn't update my profile until after, like March or April 2018 with games that I played in like November or December 2017. That's just how it goes. To kick things off, I opened the year with like a lot of Parappa the Rapper. I bought Parappa the Rapper on the PlayStation 4 for cheap and kind of came away from it disappointed. It felt like it was trying a little too hard to be wacky on purpose. The original Parappa the Rapper was kind of like a fairly normal coming-of-age story, just involving characters that looked wacky. You know, you had flowers and people with, potted plants for heads and onions and moose and talking chickens and things like that. Parappa the Rapper 2 tries to be wacky on purpose. So not only do you have this weird cast of characters, most of which returned from previous Parappa the Rapper games, but you also have like a story that involves like shrink rays and winning the lottery and romantic kung fu and a machine that's like turning all the food into noodles. And it just feels like it kind of misses the point of the first game. There's a story in there somewhere about like, Parappa the Rapper growing up to become a man again, throwing away things that are for babies or whatever. And it just doesn't land because the original game, like I said, was a coming-of-age story. Parappa the Rapper was kind of proving his love to his girlfriend, Sunny Funny. And, Parappa the Rapper 2 kind of backpedals on a lot of that. And, the whole story is Parappa worrying that he's not enough of a man for her or whatever. And it's just really weird. And not weird in a good way. Weird in like a really bad, boring, bland, lol, it's so random sort of way. So after being disappointed by Parappa the Rapper 2, I ended up just buying the first Parappa the Rapper, the PS4 remaster. And, I talked about this just a few minutes ago in the PlayStation Classic segment, but obviously the PS4 remaster of Parappa the Rapper is also terrible. But like, the button timings are all wrong, which, destroys my muscle memory, which also makes the game unnecessarily difficult. I feel like, I'm pretty good at that original Parappa the Rapper game. Like I said, I have a lot of muscle memory, but also, I just know how to play that game. And I got stuck on the PS4 version because there's a huge spike in difficulty towards the end of the game when you get to the cheap chicken level. And I've never been able to get past it because something just fails me for some reason. I can be as accurate to the button prompts as humanly possible, and it will just fail me over and over and over and over again. And again, like I said in the PlayStation Classic segment, the PS4 version is just a port of the PSP game. So, that one's broken too. The PS4 version is broken. The only way to play Parappa the Rapper properly is with the original disc and an original console that will play it. So, that was a great way to start the year. And sorry, like I said, if you hear like scratching noises or anything weird, all of a sudden my nose has begun to itch like crazy and I can't handle it. I think it's the dry weather with all the snow. You'd think snow would be wet, right? Because it's kind of like a form of frozen rain, but no. Like, in the freezing process, it dries everything out. And when you get dry, you get itchy. I'm also getting to a point where I need to, like, trim my mustache again. It's getting too long. And I think that's also what can cause my nose to itch. So anyway, after Parappa the Rapper, a friend ended up buying me Dragon Ball FighterZ, and again, I say Fighter Z, not Dragon Ball Fighters. I don't care what Namco says. They're using a capital Z at the end of that word, so it's Fighter Z. But yes, Fighter Z is a very good game. The visuals are spectacular. The only real bummer about Dragon Ball Fighter Z is that it has like a really crummy single-player campaign, which I never ended up finishing. It is so tedious. It's this big storyline. Well, it's not even a storyline. It is 3 different versions of the same storyline that are like slightly different from one another for no reason. And each one is sort of pitched like an alternate universe with the final story, I guess, supposedly being the one true version of the story. And you might think that sounds kind of cool because that's something like the Sonic Adventure games did that, and I'm a Sonic fan, so, you'd think that maybe I'd be cool with that. But as it turns out, the way, like, things differ in Fighter Z just feels random and weird in a way that I don't entirely like. So, like, in one story, you'll hit a scene where Goku teams up with Krillin to fight Cell. So then in the next story, where you're trying to play as the villains, Goku will, instead of teaming up with Krillin, Krillin leaves that scene, and then Goku teams up with Cell for some reason. And it doesn't feel very well told. The conceits it makes from storyline to storyline don't always feel super logical. And like, I could probably get with the story anyway, but in between cutscenes, what they do to like fill out the time in the game, like the stuff you actually play, it's just all these clone fights over and over and over and over again. You're refighting Tien again, you're refighting Krillin again, you're refighting Cell. Even though Cell is in your team, you're fighting this clone of Cell that's evil, even though Cell is evil. And it's just, it sucks. It's boring. It is one of the most boring single-player campaigns in a fighting game in a long time. It's just, it's tedious. It's too tedious. It's not fun. It sucks. And it sucks so bad that I guess it kind of ruined Fighter Z for me a little bit. I didn't really play it online very much. I'm not really... Well, I would say that I'm not very good, but, you know, I'm probably okay at fighting games. I'm not great, but I would have fun online, but I just never felt like starting the game up because, you know, I'd think, oh, I should play Fighter Z, and it's just like, no, the single player sucks. You know, I'm not going to bother figuring that game out if it's just going to be so bland like that. Because, you know, I'm not the kind of person who would be hooked into a fighting game strictly for the multiplayer, right? When I played Tekken 3, when I got way into that game, I mainly played it by myself. When I got way into Marvel vs. Capcom for the Dreamcast, I mainly played that game by myself. When I got way into Super Smash Bros. Melee, I mainly played that game by myself. And I think the fighting game single player is the kind of thing that a lot of people never really figured out. I know I've heard a lot of people say that, you know, Mortal Kombat 9 and Mortal Kombat 10 really have good single player campaigns for fighting games, but I still haven't played those yet. I actually own Mortal Kombat 9. I think that it's installed on my computer right now, and I still haven't played it, but like, you think about Subspace Emissary and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and that sucked too. That was boring and tedious and kind of in a lot of the same ways that Fighter Z is, and it sounds like the new Smash Brothers Ultimate that just came out is also, like, has this big World of Light single-player mode that is also just boring and tedious because you're just fighting the same enemies over and over and over and over again. And it sounds like, you know, a lot of these developers have just thought, oh, well, the secret to making a single-player for a fighting game is just making you refight everyone multiple times. And it's just like, no, I mean, kind of, yeah, but you need a little bit more to it than that. You'd need, like, I don't know, vary up their costumes a little bit. One of the things Mortal Kombat did, I guess, is that certain battles would have, like, buffs and debuffs depending on what the cutscene set up. Things like that. You know, maybe that would be something that would really help this out to feel it a little less boring, but just in general, you know, no. Don't do, like, a 7-hour story where I'm just fighting clones. Don't do a 20-hour story where I'm just fighting clones. That sucks. If you're going to do a story mode, like, as much as people hate on Street Fighter V, like, the story mode in that is, I don't want to say the story itself is good, but the concept of the story mode itself is fine because all you're doing, you know, you run through each fighter one by one by one by one until you get to the end of the story, and then you're done. It's kind of like having an arcade mode with cutscenes in between fights, you know? That's kind of what it is, and that's kind of what it needs to be. And for whatever reason, a lot of developers think that, you know, they have to pad it out with clone fights or whatever, and don't do that. I started and finished Uncharted 1, and then I started Uncharted 2. I probably don't need to tell you that you can safely skip Uncharted 1. As I said originally, that game feels less like a video game and more like, I don't know, a 4-hour QTE or something. You're just kind of walking down a narrow corridor, pushing the right buttons when the game tells you to. Uncharted 2 is, a significantly better game. It actually feels like a real video game. Like, I have places to explore and discoveries to make and things like that. But I kind of got bored with Uncharted 2 towards the end. The last place where I left off playing it was like this snowy monastery place where I'm running around with Elena. And like part of the reason I dropped it is because like the difficulty spiked super hard and it kind of stopped being fun. Which, I feel partially alone in saying that Naughty Dog likes making really difficult games. Crash Bandicoot, those original Crash Bandicoot games, they get really hard towards the end. Especially Crash Bandicoot 1, like halfway through that game, you're on Road to Nowhere, that level, and it is brutally difficult. And like Crash Bandicoot specifically, not to get off the topic of Uncharted, but it kind of has like this ebb and flow to its rhythm where you'll hit like a level that is super easy and gives you like 40 free lives, and then the level after that will be super difficult and make you spend all 40 of those lives. So, Uncharted 2 spikes really hard on its difficulty towards the end, where it kind of feels like this tower area I'm in is almost like a puzzle you're supposed to solve, where you're supposed to do stealth takedowns on guards in a certain order, and that just didn't seem like a very fun thing for me to do. I ended up dying and retrying this one specific tower section like 4 or 5 or 6 times in a row, and I thought, man, just screw this game, and I kind of haven't touched it since. And it also sounds like I could probably like safely skip Uncharted 3, so, maybe I should just move on to Last of Us Remastered, which I think I bought right around the same time as this Uncharted collection. So, I don't know. I should give Uncharted 2 one more try and see if I can't beat it. Something I bought that I didn't bring up on the podcast was Yooka-Laylee. And to be honest, I didn't bring up when I bought Yooka-Laylee for, a few reasons. Chief among them is that, multiple people have actually said that I should buy A Hat in Time. And if you don't know, both Yooka-Laylee and A Hat in Time are sort of like two peas of the same pod. They're these sort of retro throwback 3D platformers to the Banjo-Kazooie era. And for all intents and purposes, it sounds like A Hat in Time actually pulls it off, and I can say definitively that Yooka-Laylee doesn't, which is kind of a bummer because Yooka-Laylee is actually by the former team at Rare who actually made Banjo-Kazooie. But, I didn't want to announce to the world that, hey, I picked up a super cheap copy of Yooka-Laylee for like $10, when so many people have actually like been tweeting at me like, hey, A Hat in Time is on sale, are you gonna buy it now? And I'm like, well, maybe, I don't know. And I always waffle and I always wiggle out of it, and I probably shouldn't. I probably should just buy A Hat in Time at some point, but as of yet that has not happened. And doubly so now that I've bought Yooka-Laylee and figured out that, the game sucks. Now I really wanted to avoid the issue until now. I'm finally owning up to my mistake, and like the whole reason that Yooka-Laylee sucks is because, you look at screenshots and videos of this game, and it looks really nice. It looks like a proper Rare game. Like, you think back to the way Viva Pinata looked, or Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, and, Yooka-Laylee from screenshots and video looks of that same visual caliber. But in practice, it kind of feels like an indie game that's punching way, way, way above its weight and not really holding its own. It looks good, but it sucks to play. There's too much to like really like specifically go through in a segment like this. But it's just like the controls feel really mushy and sluggish. There's like this weird stamina meter now, so that, how in like Banjo-Kazooie, you get the Talon Trot for Kazooie, and it lets you sort of, because Banjo himself is kind of slow, so when you use the Talon Trot as Kazooie, it lets you run through levels really, 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 really quickly. And they give you something like that in Yooka-Laylee, but it's tied to this stupid stamina meter. So you can only use it for a specific length of time. Otherwise, they expect you to trundle through these levels super, super slowly. And like a bunch of other stuff is tied to this stamina meter too. Like a bunch of different attacks you can do. Just a lot of like really weird, annoying stuff is tied to this stupid stamina meter, and it doesn't make the game more fun. It unnecessarily limits you for like kind of no reason. It sucks. And like the level design is terrible. I get lost really, really easily. The camera sucks. Apparently they even like patched the camera to where it's supposed to be better now, and it's not. I frequently had the game bug out to where it wouldn't let me adjust the camera at all. It was just stuck in the same position it was, and I could move around the right stick or whatever, and it wouldn't move. So, that sucks. All the characters are ugly too. Like, I joke, but some of them look like, that old YouTube video, what was it? The Triforce of Wisdom or whatever. It was supposed to be like bad on purpose. It was like this dancing Triforce with like this ugly face. Yooka-Laylee characters look like they're from that video, and it's really weird and ugly. It's just a million problems like this. Where I ended up giving up in Yooka-Laylee, I think I was on my way to the third world. And I ended up spending like 10 minutes running around this random section that I thought was World 3. And as it turns out, it was just like a really stylized area still in the hub world. Which again, game is way too big. Like, it feels super, super empty for how much real estate there is to run around in. They really could have like compressed these levels down to like only the best parts, and that would have made a better game, and they didn't do that. But, it's just, ugh, Yooka-Laylee sucks. And, like, the fact that it sucks is actually a little bit depressing, too. Because, there's still, I guess, a lot of passion behind this game. It really does feel like they're trying hard to recapture that magic, and they're just failing, and, that sucks. It doesn't feel like the game is trying to be deceitful when it's, punching above its weight, like I said earlier. It just feels kind of like it's swinging for the fences and getting a strike every single time. I feel like I should probably mention No Man's Sky, but I kind of feel like I only scratched the surface of that game. I got super busy working on YouTube videos and writing Sage articles that, once I bought it, I kind of never really went back to it. They've been updating it since then, adding more and more content. I think there's about to be a new update soon that adds like proper underwater areas that seems really cool. But it was really rough around the edges when I played it. It seemed kind of buggy and like the systems weren't quite working properly. I'd probably like tenaciously, is that the word I'm thinking of? I'd probably, like, I'd be on the fence recommending the game, with me leaning towards more, maybe you should play it. But don't get it at the $60 they're asking for it right now. I paid $30 for it, and I think I said at the time that kind of felt like maybe a little too much. There is probably, like, near infinite content in this game, but it's all algorithmically generated. I don't know. I feel like I have to stretch my neck out when I say that word. Algorithmically. But it's all procedurally generated, let's say. That's a better way to put it. So, like I said earlier, all the pieces don't really line up. Some of the terrain generation tools are a little glitchy. I've had, like, enemies spawn on me in the middle of buildings where they don't belong. All kinds of weird, buggy, weird, random, weird stuff. So, $30 is probably right around the place where it feels the most comfortable. Catch it on a sale if you can. And, it's not necessarily a game you have to give 100% of your attention to all the time. But, if you're listening to a podcast or watching a movie and you want to be the kind of crazy person that likes to multitask like I am, it's a very good game for that. Where, you're kind of splitting your attention between something on the TV and something on your computer, on your game console, or whatever. that's a good place to play No Man's Sky. This was the year that I finally played and finished Doom 4. That's a really great game. That's a really great game, though I'd say it kind of starts a little bit slowly and doesn't really end like super strong. My main problem is that like the drip feed of new toys and weapons you get at the start of the game feels a little slow. Like it took like 3 or 4 levels before I really started to feel like I was clicking with the game, and it actually properly found its groove. Because I think I've described this elsewhere, but you know, you start out with the pistol and like you're fighting like the basic zombie enemies, which are basically nothing. They don't really attack you. They're mainly there so that you can do glory kills on them over and over and over again. And it kind of adds one new weapon or one new enemy per level as you play through the game. And it's not really until, like I said, around the 3rd or 4th level that you finally have enough weapons and enough like enemies to fight that it really starts to feel properly varied like it should. But you know, I still really like it, even though, like I said, the ending is kind of a bummer. It kind of ends on a cliffhanger that sets up the sequel that, you know, I'm not entirely keen on, but at least the sequel is coming soon. And, you know, ending aside, the whole game itself is usually pretty fun. I just kind of expected a bigger finish that never came. It's one of those games where, like, just talking about it here, I kind of want to play it again. I kind of want to, you know, go back through in the arcade mode or whatever else. But it's like 60 or 70 or 80 gigabytes to install that game now. And that's a lot of space to just keep hanging around. Maybe I need a new hard drive or whatever. And finally, the last real big game, and perhaps my biggest game of 2018, would be Final Fantasy VI. Unfortunately, I kind of gave all my in-depth thoughts about this game on the last podcast. And which is to say that, you know, I kind of found the game to be a little bit boring overall. Mainly it feels like it's trying to be more cinematic, but in ways that feel like kind of clumsy and sort of hampered by the medium, like, you know, being this Super Nintendo game or whatever. Like, I can very easily picture some of the cutscenes from Final Fantasy VI in my head as like a properly animated cutscene, like in a PlayStation game or whatever. But there's only so much you can do when like the camera is locked to this overhead perspective or whatever. And you have these tiny little sprites and they can't really emote very well. You know, it's just, it kind of kills the cinematic mood that this game is apparently trying to go for. But even then, like the script itself has a lot of problems. It's not always clear what you're doing or why. Sometimes characters flip-flop on certain issues, like out of nowhere for no apparent reason. Like, I think an example I brought up a few months ago was doing the opera scene in the game, the very famous opera scene in Final Fantasy VI, where this woman in your party, Celeste, she has to fill in for an opera singer at the opera house, as it were. And when you're first starting this scene, someone else in your party volunteers Celeste for her. She says, hey, or he says, hey, Celeste, why don't you fill in for this opera singer? You look just like her. And Celeste is like, no way, that's never going to happen. I'm never going to get on stage. I'll never sing opera. I can't sing. This is the worst idea. And then, like, the very next sentence out of her mouth is, okay, I'll do it. And she's, you know, all of a sudden she's super gung-ho from being like, no, I'll never do it. Now, you know, she's flipped and now she's totally into it and she's gonna do it. And it's not really a scene that feels like she's flip-flopping her opinion for laughs. It's just this weird change of heart out of nowhere that the game doesn't really set up or explain. It's just something that happens. And, you know, things like that just leave it feeling a little bit messy, a little bit unfocused. You know, it has a few good moments here and there, but it's not as good as people would lead you to believe it to be. I keep wishing it had like a remake, like, you know how Final Fantasy IV got remade for the Nintendo DS or whatever? I would be totally down for a remake of Final Fantasy VI that was done in that style. You know, sort of refresh the script, flesh things out a little bit more, kind of give everything a little bit more room to breathe and, tie it all back together to make it feel a little more coherent. That's kind of what I think Final Fantasy VI needs at this point. Just rehashing the Super Nintendo game isn't really going to do it for me anymore because I don't know. I'm cold on that game, and I still haven't finished it. Like, I'm on the final dungeon as we speak. I actually got to the very final boss of the game, and I got to like the 4th phase of, I don't know, 6 or 7 phases of that boss, and I died, and it was like, I really don't want to watch this cutscene again. I don't want to fight through all those phases again, and that's kind of where I left off. And I don't know if I'm ever going to go back to it. Like, on one hand, it's like, I spent all this time, I spent like 40 hours in this game to get to this point. I should just finish the game, but at the same point, like, I've quit games that I actually like at the final boss. Most famously, there was Bowser's Inside Story for the DS. I got all the way to the final form of the final boss, and I made like a stupid mistake, and I died. And I said, okay, I'll try this again tomorrow. And as of yet, I have never retried that final boss. So, I loved Bowser's Inside Story. That's probably, of the 3 Mario... No, there's more than that now. There's like 4. Out of the 4 or 5 Mario and Luigi RPGs, Bowser's Inside Story is probably my favorite. And even then, I didn't finish the final boss. So, with a game like Final Fantasy VI, where I've been not necessarily hating the game, but just kind of lukewarm/cold on it, the idea of having to redo this big cutscene and all these phases of this final boss a second time, just doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun and like something that I want to do. But that's probably it for me for 2018 if I had to pick like something to name my game of the year this year. I guess I'd probably give it to Doom 4 because that's probably the most fun I've had with a video game this year. And it's also one of the only games I've finished. I finished Doom 4, I finished Sonic Mania Plus, and that's kind of it. There's probably more games in there that I finished that I'm just spacing out, I don't have my backloggery in front of me, I just have my notes here. Maybe I'll link my backloggery in the podcast show notes. And for the 1 or 2 of you out there who would be interested in looking at it, you can call me on my bluff and see what games I may or may not have finished this year. But that's it for this podcast. Thank you all for supporting me as long as you have. I know it's been a rocky road, especially this year, out of any year. 2018 was definitely a year for me to regain stability. And I'd say I'm definitely closing 2018 in a better place than when I started. Here's hoping that, things only continue to get better from here. And, I wouldn't be able to do any of this without all my supporters out there on Patreon, which, if you're listening to this podcast when it goes up in December, you are a Patreon supporter. And, I could not be more thankful for what you guys have allowed me to do. It's, every now and then it kind of hits me that like, wow, people like me this much. People like the stuff that I do this much. I suffer from imposter syndrome probably worse than anyone else. When you hear me stumble over my words here in this podcast, even now, it's a very stressful thing for me to do, to put this podcast together, to talk for as long as I do. And it's just, thank you for everything. I've come a long way and I'm still not anywhere close to where I want to be. And in some ways, I don't know how to get where I want to be, but, wherever it is I end up, I hope it's with you guys. So, thank you for everything. And one of the things I do want to get into for 2019 is maybe doing a little bit more positivity in my videos. I feel like I've been especially negative this year, and I could probably stand to start focusing on games that I I praise a lot more, let's say. But that's 2019 talk. We'll burn that bridge when we get there. I'll see you guys next year.